Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where the Russians during the previous 3 days have carried out the biggest attack, the biggest massive attack using drones and missiles since the beginning of the special military operation. As of the previous night, the Minister of Defense of Ukraine stated that the Russians used 147 drones to attack the territory of Ukraine, and these days we receive lots of videos on this matter. For example, during the previous night we received another video of how the Russians were attacking the city of Kyiv and different parts of Ukraine with missiles, and here we can see the city of Kyiv itself, and the author of this video claims that in this video we can see how the Russians were attacking the capital of Ukraine using Ha-101 cruise missiles, and here we can see at least 2 explosions, which means that 2 missiles managed to hit the target. Furthermore, we received details about attacks through the western parts of Ukraine that took place on the 13th of May of 2026, and here we can see the consequences of attacking the area of the city by the name of Zhovkva. Here we can see a black smoke over the object of energy infrastructure, which most likely was completely destroyed as a result of the Russian attack. So Russians used more than 1,600 drones and missiles altogether, and today, more precisely yesterday in the evening, the President of Ukraine Zelensky stated that he has instructed the armed forces of Ukraine and special services to propose options for responding to a Russian attack on Kyiv. So Zelensky demanded to strike back the Russians, and during the previous night the Ukrainians carried out their massive attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation, and this map was published by pro-Ukrainian sources yesterday in the evening, and according to this picture, the Ukrainians used 250 regular drones and 5 jet-powered drones to attack the territory of Russia. And during the night, we received lots of updates on this matter. According to information we have, the Ukrainians were attacking the city of Ryazan, more precisely the Ryazan oil refinery, so this object of energy infrastructure of the Russian Federation. Let's discuss this attack in details. The Ukrainians were using hundreds of drones to attack the territory of the city, and you can see in this video, we can see a drone that struck a building, not an object of energy infrastructure, but just a civilian building. Here we can see another building that was attacked by the Ukrainians, by the Ukrainian drones that were most likely moving in the direction of the oil refinery, but these buildings were on their way, so that is why the Ukrainians hit this building and damaged them significantly. But despite these damages, we see that most likely several drones of the armed forces of Ukraine managed to get the Ryazan oil refinery, and as a result of this attack, we can see a very big black smoke over the city of Ryazan, and here we can see probably first seconds after the Ukrainians struck this oil refinery, a big fire, and here we can see the city of Ryazan and the Ryazan oil refinery from another angle. As you can see, as a result of attack, a big fire, huge fire broke out, and most likely the Ukrainians managed to deal significant damage to this refinery. This is not the first refinery that was attacked and damaged by the Ukrainians since the beginning of this year. The Ukrainians attacked Novorossiysk refineries, the Tuapse refinery, Perm refinery. So since the beginning of this year, the Ukrainians managed to deal significant damage to the Russian refineries through the territory of the Russian Federation. As you can see, the Ukrainians continue doing this, which means that most likely in coming days we may expect a retaliatory strike from the Russian side. Once again, the Russians will use dozens of missiles and hundreds of drones to attack the territory of Ukraine. But as of the Russian side, they attacked the territory of Ukraine not just to deal damage to objects of energy infrastructure. The Russians, at least when talking about the previous massive attack, the Russians attacked the territory of Ukraine because the Russians launched their major offensive operation, their major late spring and early summer military offensive operation, with the purpose to improve positions significantly. So now let's discuss in details what exactly the Russians managed to achieve during the first days of this offensive operation. And first we're going to talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction, where the Russians improved their position significantly. According to information we have, this morning the Russians reported that as a result of clashes, the armed forces of the Russian Federation established complete control over the settlement by the name of Charivna. In this video we can see how exactly the clashes for the settlement of Charivna were taking place. In this video we can see an artillery preparation, then attacks with tossed flamethrower systems, then aviation attacks, and in the final part of this video we can see four episodes of how Russians were raising their Russian flag through the entire territory of the settlement of Charivna. So 4 episodes, 4 flags were geolocated. 2 of them were raised in the southern parts of the settlement of Charivna, and 2 of them were raised in the northern parts of the same settlement. Based on this video, based on the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, based on the report of channels affiliated with the Group of Forces East, we have adjusted the map. So this is the situation by the end of the 14th of May, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 15th of May of 2026. The Russians improved their position significantly, and now the Russians from these positions most likely will continue offensive operation further in the western direction with the purpose to establish complete control over this pocket of tree lines, fields and fortifications there. First, the Russians will try to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area. When the Russians maintain the lines in this area, most likely the Russians will intensify their pressure towards the settlement by the name of Novoselovka and Gulyai-Polskaya. We expect that these 2 villages would collapse or may collapse also in coming days. Another important area is the settlement of Zaporizhzhia, where the clashes between the Russians and the Ukrainians are continuing. This morning, pro-Ukrainian sources also published a video where we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking Russians through the southeastern parts of the settlement of Zaporizhzhia. We can see how Ukrainian FPV drones were attacking positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in this area. During this video, several sources managed to geolocate up to 2 positions. One of the attacks took place in this area, and the second attack took place in this area. Based on these videos, we came to conclusion that most likely the Russians, as a result of clashes, managed to establish complete control over the southeastern parts of the settlement, and based on this video we have adjusted the map. So this is the situation by the end of the 14th of May of 2026, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 15th of May of 2026, and this video confirms that the Russians are already on the territory of Zaporizhzhia, and that the Russians continue advancing further in the northwestern direction with the purpose to establish complete control over this settlement and to force Ukrainians to fall back from this area further in the western direction. So the Russians began their major Zaporizhzhia offensive operation, especially through the eastern Zaporizhzhia flank. We're talking about this territory, and the main task of Russians is to attack the city of Orekhov and the Orekhov agglomeration from behind and from the northeastern direction. So the battle for Zaporizhzhia begins, as we can see. Now let's move further. Another important update is coming from the most northeastern part of the Kharkiv region. Today, the Group of Forces North stated that the Russians, as a result of clashes, established complete control over the settlement by the name of Chaikivka. This is a very small village, but the village which is located on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates based on the reports that were published both by the Minister of Defense and the Group of Forces North. And now we can see that Russians most likely managed to cross the river of Volcha and to establish physical control over the road between the villages of Karaishna, Volhovka, and the most northeastern part of Kharkiv region. So we see that the Ukrainians currently suffer huge logistics when talking about the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine, which is located in this area, in this part of the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region. The road was cut by the Russians physically, and now from this position, most likely the Russians will continue offensive operation further in the direction of the settlements of Karaishna and Volhovka with the purpose to establish a strong foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha. And when this mission is finished, then the Russians will continue offensive operation further in the southern direction towards the settlement of Belый Kolodezh, and of course the Russians will continue offensive operation to attack the Ukrainians from behind in the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians have carried out several counteroffensives in the area of the river of Skol in the Dvorechensky direction. The Ukrainians, as a result of a counteroffensive operation, managed to recapture the settlement of Odradne, at least some part of the settlement, most likely its western part. We came to this conclusion based on the video that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and in this video we can see how Ukrainians were entering the settlement of Odradne and how Ukrainians were securing this territory and how Ukrainians were raising their flag right exactly at this point. Based on this video, we came to the conclusion that either the village is in the gray zone or under strong control of the armed forces of Ukraine. The Ukrainians continue their counter-offensive operation, and telling the truth, this is not the first episode received during the previous 2 months when the Ukrainians show updates about their counter-attacks in this region. It seems that the Russians reduced the number of forces in this area in favor of other directions, so that is why the Ukrainians currently use the situation to carry out successful counterattacks. As for the rest of the front lines, we have updates from the Kostiantynivka direction. The Russians continue offensive operation in this area. Several sources stated that the situation for the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine in the area between the villages of Verolubovka, Popasne, Stinki, Podolska, Charivna continue deteriorating, which means that in coming days we might receive additional changes on the ground. Furthermore, we received a report that the Russians continue improving their positions through the village of Oleksandropol. The sources stated that by the beginning of the 15th of May of 2026, the Russians have control over more than 40% of the settlement, and the Russians continue advancing, but the Ukrainians are trying to do everything they can with the purpose to slow down the Russians. Another important video we received from the most southern parts of the front lines, from the city of Berdyansk. And today pro-Ukrainian sources published a video of how using drones the Ukrainians were attacking vessels, commercial vessels of the army of Russia, maybe vessels that were moving and bringing additional munition. The Ukrainians were attacking these vessels with drones, and as a result of these attacks, several vessels were damaged in the area of the city of Berdyansk. We have covered most of the updates regarding the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. Now let's discuss the situation in the world. Let's discuss, first of all, let's talk about the oil prices. Today is Friday, 15th of May of 2026, and today oil markets will close within the next several hours. And as we can see, the oil prices are at a very high level. By the end of the week, oil prices remained high and continue to rise. So this is yet another indication that the negotiations in China have failed. The oil prices, for example, WTI was on the level of $104 per barrel, which means that either the United States of America during the day will do something which will force the oil prices to drop, or he will not be able to do anything. But in this case, according to information we have, the United States of America may resume its military operation against Iran. At least this information, and this was also stated by the President of the United States of America. Trump may order new strikes on Iran immediately after returning from China. The United States has already notified Israel of this possibility, and Tel Aviv is preparing for the resumption of hostilities and the possible response from Tehran. Representatives of the Israeli army and the Central Command of the United States Armed Forces have discussed options for striking Iran's fuel and energy infrastructure in recent days. The goal is to increase pressure on Tehran and force it to return to nuclear program negotiations on more favorable terms for Washington. Furthermore, I would like to remind you that during talks and visits to China, during talks between Trump and Xi Jinping, the United States of America managed to receive a promise from the Chinese side that China is not going to sell weapons to the Iranian side, but according to information we have, China will continue purchase Iranian oil. So what does it mean? This means that China probably will continue selling weapons to the Iranian side, but through third parties and third countries, maybe through some African countries, maybe even through the Russian Federation, or maybe through any other country in the world, but not directly. This is the only thing that the President of the United States of America managed to get as a result of discussions and talks with the President of China, Xi Jinping. So everything is getting ready before the next round of clashes in the area of the Middle East, and everything is possible even through this weekend, because most likely during the day the President of the United States of America will not do anything. He doesn't want to force oil prices to move further and higher, but when oil markets close, most likely we can expect everything. At the same time, we receive report about critical situation in Havana. The sources are saying that hundreds of people took to the streets after more than 20 hours without electricity. Protesters blocked roads, burned trash, banged pots, and changed slogans against the authorities. Furthermore, we received the report that CIA Director John Ratcliffe met with Cuban officials to deliver a message from President Trump. So most likely in coming weeks something big is going to happen in this area. And I would like to remind you that currently the U.S. strike group Gerald R. Ford is moving in the direction of the United States of America. The United States authorities tell us that this group is moving for repairing purposes, but most likely the United States of America may use this aircraft strike group to support the operation around Cuba and on the territory of Cuba itself if Cuba doesn't make any concessions in the U.S. favor. And that's it for the short video. The Military Summary channel remains to be condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.